Episode 37, Best Visual Effects in Cinema.
Welcome to the Visionary Variety Podcast, where we cover cool stuff like photo, video, film, books, and technology. So, switch on your brain and enjoy the show.
Welcome back to the podcast, everybody. Today, we are going to be talking about our favorite special effects sequences in movies. Now, this is going to be CGI and or practical effects. I've been looking forward to this episode all week. I cannot wait to hear what you guys have to add to this. I am Daniel Grove, one of the hosts of the podcast. We've also got with us Nate Gunn.
Hey.
And our returning special guest, Abi Leon.
Hey, everybody. Great to be back.
As soon as I came up with the idea for this episode, I knew we had to have you on this episode because you went to school for film, right?
Yes,
Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I went to Full Sail University for film and digital cinematography, and they teach us everything from pre-production all the way to distribution. And so, and everything, I mean, they give you hands-on for everything. They even give you a couple classes on theory, which is really fun, color theory, film theory, and just some really cool stuff. So yeah, been doing film for about 9 years.
Did you have any classes regarding special effects or compositing or anything like that?
Yes, just basic classes.
Yeah.
Because that in itself is a completely standalone. It's a whole industry. So it's a completely standalone discipline. And so, so we did touch on some basic stuff, just simple typography, overlaying graphics, some basic Photoshop stuff that I actually already knew all that stuff, but I guess, I don't know if it was a filler class or whatever, but because not everybody that goes in there has the experience that one does.
Or desire to do that.
Yeah. So, it's just something to touch on.
Awesome. Well, for myself, I have never been to any formal training for movie or special effects. Although I feel like ever since my childhood, I have been paying special attention to special effects, whether it's computer graphics or, like I said, practical effects, which is where whether it's an animatronic puppet or explosions or something real that's actually happening on set. That's what I consider a practical effect, not being done by a computer. So I've just always been enthralled by the element of excitement and wonder and make believe that special effects is able to inject into a story. And especially when I figured out how these things were done. When I was in middle school, I started 3D modeling. I started making animations and visual effects on my own, just as a side hobby. And so because of that, when I watched movies, I was really looking at it and trying to break it apart in my head and learn, how do they do this? How do they insert that fake thing in the background? Or how do they replace this body part, with this? It's always something I've had a special love for. So this episode is going to be super fun because we're all going to share some of our favorite. Now, I know the episode is called Best Visual Effects, but that was really just the headline to get you here. So now you're listening, but really it's just our favorite because, we can't really with any authority say this is the best special effect in all movie history. That's a little out there, but we're going to be sharing some of our personal favorites. And also, we tried our best to find ones that actually did redefine or begin a new era or new technology within cinema. And you'll see that. I think many of you will agree the ones that we're going to point out are pretty crucial and historical as far as visual effects. So let's get this going. Abi, you are a special guest, so why don't you start with one of yours?
All right. So I think one of the quintessentials of modern visual effects has to be The Matrix, the first movie, and their development of bullet time. I think that really pushed the envelope forward. They upped the bar completely. That forced everybody, completely out of the box thinking, literally out of the box thinking. They went beyond CGI. They used computers and practical cameras to achieve this effect. And it literally, I would say that it launched visual effects 10 years into the future instantly with the release of that movie. And, it's a classic. It's now it is. It's 20 years old. It's a 20-year-old movie.
And it still looks good.
And it still looks good. It holds up. I watched it 2 weeks ago and it still holds up. Storyline, character development, plot, visual effects, everything is just
this is a little bit of a tangent, but correct me if I'm wrong. You, Abi Leon, consider this movie to be the perfect movie. Is that correct?
Yes, absolutely. Hands down.
Okay.
It's actually my number one. So yes.
I don't disagree.
It's my number one, not just because of visual effects, but just like the things that
everything.
I mentioned. It just melds so many different disciplines together to such a great story.
Now tell us about Bullet Time. How was it done and what is it really?
So Bullet Time is essentially, the way they did it. John Gaeta was the VFX supervisor for that movie, and what he developed, the Wachowskis came to him and said, "Hey, we want to do this." They were manga comic people, and they said we wanted to like spin around here, and one of the first things that we were joking about it earlier before the show about spinning a camera super fast around somebody, and that wasn't practical. So what they did is they created a huge array of cameras sequentially around the subject, and so then they would trigger the cameras, and the guy would do his action or whatever, and it would sequentially take hundreds of pictures around this
at the same time.
At the same time, some were at the same time, like the one that at Trinity did. That was at the same time where it froze time.
Yeah,
and then when Neo does his little backflip thing towards the end of the movie, he's actually moving. Right? Yeah. So
yeah, that's true.
But there's so many different things that you could do with the array that he had. Again, it would just created some really limitless possibilities because the array could be as big as you wanted, and or just a simple 90-degree shot. Yeah.
So later in post, they put these still images all in a sequence, basically like frames of a video. And how did they make it look so smooth? Like, was there other technology involved with that?
From what I gathered, the only thing that you really need to add to make it smooth is motion blur. So what they would do is add like a drop frame in between the frames and just add just tiniest bit of motion blur to make it feel like it was actual, continuous film. So that's really that's the secret to that. But when you're doing the actual freeze frame, you don't have to add any of that because you could just
still.
It's just a still.
And then the last shot is a live action camera that continues on.
Correct. Yeah.
Finishes the shot with video. Yeah.
Yeah. So this was actually the precursor to what's called mocha tracking, which is now the industry standard. That they developed how to track things in 3D space, live action 3D space, and kind of just developed that. It was just the computing power that they used really at the time. Genius people working on the visual effects team that were just trying to find solutions to their problems. How do we make a 3D, how do we make a 3D environment track with the movement of the cameras? How do we make make it seem seamless with color grading and digital? I mean, digital color grading was one of the first things that the Matrix did as well. Well, they did actually. I think they did analog color grading, but with the process in the film and everything like that. But there's so many things just in that they pioneered, that John Gaeta pioneered. That is just, it really would be. You could talk a whole podcast on just this one movie, I think. But yeah, just the tracking was, it was a piece of software that they had to develop to track the spaces, track the CGI environments, and make it match with the lead actors. It kind of went crazy for episodes 2 and 3, because then they started using CGI people, and that was when it still looked rubbery.
It wasn't quite there.
Yeah. Kind of that Spider-Man, the Spider-Man look. But they did it practically and virtually in the first one. And then they went all virtual, the second and third one, to get some really crazy shots, which, like you said, weren't 100% there, but still.
I love the aspect of visual effects, the ones like this that really are groundbreaking because they involve science, they involve art, computer systems in very creative ways. I mean, it's literally troubleshooting, like it's like an artist
exactly
comes to a technician like, hey, I had this wild imagination or this dream. How can we make this into a film version? And they find ways to do it. And sometimes it's really wacky or very impressive ways that they find ways to visualize these ideas and these artistic concepts. I just love that part of this whole thing.
Well, what's cool about just visual effects and the pioneering of visual effects is that it leads to some pretty amazing things, like the things that you take for granted now, tracking, for example, how hard it was for them to do it back then. And now, you have software that can do it on your phone. Yeah. Literally Pokemon Go and all that stuff. And
have you seen that thing where have you seen the app where they can map like a celebrity's face onto your face?
No.
It's like a augmented reality 3D tracking real-time face mask. So you can talk and you look like Marilyn Monroe or whoever's face you put onto your face.
That's interesting.
Creepy, but really cool.
Yeah. You know what's cool about what the Matrix did is that they've led to some really interesting technologies that are actually out right now. Intel is developing this technology called volumetric reality. It's their version of volumetric imaging. I can't remember exactly what it's called, where essentially they have this giant dome, and it's filled with cameras and sensors. And it's similar to motion capture, but there's no actual dots. There's no motion capture suit. They create points in space with these sensors. They film all these different angles, and then the software correlates and
makes a 3D
model. And basically every aspect of that film can be viewed from every aspect on that stage. Virtually.
A real actor.
So you can actually say, hey, I want to be this actor right here. What is his point of view? And you could watch what he's watching during the movie. It's insane. It really is. And that's a technology that is just emerging right now. As a matter of fact, Paramount just signed a deal with Intel to do a couple of movies that way in the next, I would say in the next 18 months. So volumetric filmmaking, and that came from, the Matrix.
That is immersive right there.
Very immersive, yeah.
Well, I bet what takes them currently a whole dome worth of cameras and sensors will eventually be done by like 6 different drone cameras on location.
I think they said it was I can't remember. I want to say like over 100 petabytes of data for really, I mean, just the crunching that they had to do was insane.
That's so crazy. Very cool. Well, thanks for sharing that. Okay, Nate, what do you have on your list?
I have the movie Gravity. And you know what? Honestly, people have told me that is not their favorite movie, but visually, it's probably one of my favorite movies.
It's intense.
Yes. Alfonso is the director, and he starred George Clooney and Sandra Bullock. And reading a little bit on it, they started the project with one vision, and they realized that they were going to have to go a little bit in a different direction, because they were wanting like 12 8-minute long clips without a break. And they were basically, they built up this rig where they, of course, were wires, and they did a lot of spinning and turning, and they CGI'd the roof basically. It was open top. So they had think of a pipe, but without a top. And it took both the actors, they say, I mean, more or less, it was about a 5 to 6 month core training for them to be able to float around and look like they're in space. But some intense ab working out for this movie. Earlier, before we started talking, we were talking about this arm, the robot arm, which I don't remember the name. They basically used the same thing, and they would sit the actors down. And if y'all have seen the movie, there's a lot of spinning, a lot of a lot of breathing.
If you have motion sickness, do not watch Gravity.
Yeah. But what's crazy about it is the actors never went upside down. They sat them down in the chair, and they just sit there and they pivoted around, and the camera and the lights would rotate in the screen behind them. And they had big screens on the outside of the unit to give the certain light they needed to reflect the earth, no light. Wow. And so as they're rotating, everything's rotating. Like Daniel says, motion sickness galore. But
that's crazy.
That was one thing that they wanted to get in this movie, was they wanted those long, intense shots, 5-6 minutes long, where there's no break. they were talking also about the CGI and how it was new age, but I honestly didn't understand that because there was a lot of things going on this time where I thought everything was new age when CGI, but I don't know. I felt awful at that part doing some of the research. They were like, yeah, this movie is, new age and CGI. And I was like, it literally looks, that's exactly. I know even in my own family, they're like, yeah, it was not a great movie. And I'm like,
I think we've talked about it before, the effect of all these super blockbusters that have on just, regular movie going experience. You expect it if it's not to the level of that blockbuster, it's not that good. But if you watch it again as a standalone, it's pretty good.
Mm-hmm. I remember Gravity had a lot of amazing physics. Like during the collision scenes, there's just particles everywhere and things spinning and flying and hitting each other. Like that's a lot of calculation on the computer part. And the lighting just looks so pristine and perfect. Like that is what outer space looks like, I'm pretty sure.
Except for the globe Earth. No, I'm just kidding.
Oh gosh. The Earth was a little too spherical. Yeah.
Heliocentric model. Sorry.
Yeah, the CGI in that movie was beautiful, and as far as my unexpertise, I can see very realistic looking. So they put a lot of work in. I'd love to know the render times for that movie. I bet they're insane.
Yeah, people now they just render. There's render farms in Hollywood that you just rent the time because it's like a place like okay, we're in San Antonio and Rack Space is here. Rack Space would be a render farm, and then they sublet 10 machines to Hollywood for whatever. But yeah, it's intense. There's dedicated companies just for render time.
That's insane.
I'd love to do that. I just rendered a video last night that was 3,000 frames long.
Whoa! I
did a low resolution render, so it was small in dimension, and I cut down some of the samples and the noise reduction and stuff like that. But it took about 12 hours to render. And it was pretty grainy for what I was doing. It was a lot of complex particle stuff. So render times is no joke.
Was that the one you posted?
I posted some stills. It would look like wheel spokes with like lasers shooting into the circle, real trippy and abstract. I'm trying to make it where I can render it like in a timely fashion and also look clean.
Yeah.
And when it's done, I'll post it. But if you go to my 3D art Facebook page, which is called New Vision, or on Facebook, it's facebook.com/newvisionfx. You can see some stills that I took of it, and it's fun. It's very abstract and very sci-fi. So we'll see if I can get it done without breaking my computer. So my next thing, speaking of render times, is Gargantua from Interstellar. So Gargantua is the name of the black hole in Interstellar, and this visual effect was really amazing. Not only did it look cool, like that's great and all that, it looks cool, and the movie looks beautiful, and you just want to stare at it and like this looks deadly, but it's also beautiful. But what went behind making this visual in the movie is actually realistic science, a crap ton of math, and some really, really smart physicists chiming into this. So basically, the executive director of this movie, his name is Kip Thorne. He also happens to be a science advisor and an expert in relativistic science and physics, which is Einsteinian stuff about relativity, gravity, time, all that warping space-time stuff that black holes and other masses that have gravity do. So this guy knows what he's talking about. He's not just like a techno-babble, nerd, just like, oh yeah, just throw some cool words together, have a little exposition scene, and everything will be good. No, he actually sat down with, I'm assuming, a board of physicists, but he knows about gravity and science and physics. So they sat down and they said, okay, how are we going to render this thing and make it accurate to how light is treated when intersecting a body of intense gravity, which is what a black hole is. So just real quick, a black hole is usually a collapsed star that the gravity within the center of this mass of matter is so intense that it sucks everything in, and it keeps sucking in and it keeps sucking in, and it doesn't stop. And eventually the actual body of the black hole is so gravitationally strong that light can't get out. So that's why it's black. Okay, it's a sphere of blackness. No light can get out, which is why it's black, but there is light around it. And there's an accretion disk, which is really hot gas that's spinning around, that's making its way in. But for now, it's just orbiting around and around and around and getting super hot because of friction. So in the movie, when we look at Gargantua, we see what looks like kind of like a Saturn shape. Think of Saturn. We've got the planet in the middle, which in our case is actually the black hole.
Right.
And the disk around, what would be Saturn is the accretion disk. But in the movie, you see this cool warping effect where the accretion disk, which is yellow glowing gas, warps up on the top around the sphere and goes down to the other side. And then you see a little bit of it warping on the bottom part of the sphere as well. It's very warpy and trippy. And the reason for that warping is what's called gravitational lensing. So the gravity is so intense that it will bend light rays around itself. So if there's a star or a cluster of stars behind a black hole that we can't see, we can actually see them in a warped way because the photons or the light from those stars is getting warped around the edges of this black hole sphere. So what they did in the movie is they made their own rendering program called DNGR, which stands for Double Negative Gravitational Renderer. And Double Negative is the company that did the VFX in this movie. And I have a whole new level of respect for them because these guys are like amazing. So, and also look up Double Negative. They've done a bunch of other really big movies with some amazing VFX. So anyway, they made DNGR to render how light acts around gravity. Normally, computer graphics processes light in a way that the simulated photon of light or the ray goes in straight lines. It hits a surface, it might spread out and bounce, make soft light or harsh light. But when we're dealing with gravity bending light, it's different. So they made this whole new program, rendering algorithm program So they made this brand new program with different algorithms to simulate what light would look like when it's bending around something at different amounts. And it produced the Gargantua that we see in the movie. So that's actually scientifically accurate. And Neil deGrasse Tyson, which is, one of the leading physicists right now, also a great personality in video and an educator, he says this is the most scientifically accurate sci-fi movie. And I saw a video where he actually ranked it like a 9 out of 10. Which is impressive given how science fiction-y this movie is.
And he trashes movies too. He
does,
he's brutal. So for him to give a 9 is amazing.
Big deal. Yeah, so they simulated gravitational lensing of the light from surrounding stars and also the accretion disk that goes around the black hole. And they translated these actual physics equations into visible, art that could be 3D rendered. So some of these render times for individual frames were upwards to over 100 hours for one frame.
Wow. One frame,
3.5 days for one frame of video.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, now they said I did find out that was when the camera was closer to the black hole because there was more detail, more warping of starlight, things like that. So it was much more calculation intensive. What really impresses me about this, sure, it can make a cool visual. That's great. But this program that they made for the gravitational lensing renders is so accurate. They're actually using it in real scientific research and they're learning things about black holes because of this.
Yeah.
Like very few things can claim, that level of accuracy. That's pretty awesome when you can use a simulated program or a 3D graphics model to actually tell you what real nature is going to do. Like they even discovered things with this program. One of the things they discovered is that light rays from, say, a star far behind the black hole, and it doesn't just warp around the sphere of the black hole and then come towards us and we see a distorted version of it. It can actually loop within the gravity wells of the black hole. It can loop around 13 times before the light escapes the black hole and hits us. Other wild things, which you can see, if you look this up on YouTube, you can see examples of gravitational lensing, as well as these actual like test renders they did, that one star from behind the black hole can be warped and split in 2 or more shapes. And we're actually seeing 2 copies of the star bent by gravity until it comes full circle. And the split image of the one star joins back again and comes back together as one beam, one spot of light. This is really cool stuff. After doing the research for this episode, I was so inspired by all this, science and render stuff. I got into my 3D program. I'm like, all right, I'm going to make a black hole. Didn't quite work out.
Yeah, I don't know if Blender can handle that.
No, not like this. Nowhere close. But I was playing with rays of light, and I made some really cool simulations that use particles to simulate light beams and how they reflect and bounce around stuff. And I was using like spherical objects to warp stuff and kind of do some fun just playing with light. That thing I was mentioning earlier, if you go into my 3D graphics page, you'll see some of that stuff there.
You need to do like a live stream of you doing that stuff, like, just your screen and maybe, cool. Twitch, like, you're down in the bottom corner. It's like, okay, here's what I'm going to do. I mean, it'd be interesting to just, that would give people a preview of.
That would be cool. The program that I use, Blender, can actually do physics simulations. Mm-hmm. like collision and bouncing. It can do liquid, smoke, fire simulations and all stuff. But if my render was a little bit quicker, that would be really fun to do. I could do some basic stuff, but that's a good idea. I'll keep that. Yeah, so that's it for my first thing is Gargantua. It's pretty sweet.
Cool.
Black holes.
Yeah, that's pretty intense, man. I like all that stuff. I mean, it's one of those things where art pushes science. You know,
Yeah.
it's like a medieval Renaissance. You know, where it was the artists that were pushing science. Galileo and Michelangelo and Donatello and Raphael. No, I'm just kidding. And just, you know, some of these Renaissance men that were, you know, artists first, and it was their imagination that pushed science forward. You know. So yeah, it's the same thing. It's these artists, these visual artists, and these, you know, imaginative thinkers that are pushing the boundaries of science, and, you know, we're discovering new things, and it's pretty amazing.
Abi, what's your next thing on your list?
Well, the next thing that I wanted to talk about as far as best visual effects is digital de-aging, and the movie that stands out the most. People will probably easily relate to this movie. It's Benjamin Button. The Curious Case of Benjamin Button. I was actually looking at this technology before you asked me. So it's just very apropos time that you asked me. And just the process for digital de-aging, it was so insane. Okay, so I'm a video production director for a local nonprofit. And, you know, the host's makeup isn't always 100% spot on. So I actually bought this plugin for Final Cut Pro called Skin Smoother. And there's a new one out, but I haven't gotten that one yet. But this one, what it does is it basically puts virtual makeup on a person, takes care of blemishes. It's digital de-aging at its simplest form, which is just skin smoothing. But what they do in Benjamin Button is completely next level, completely, you know, upper echelon type of visual effects. So what they do is they actually CGI the actor, and then again, we're talking about mocha tracking. They track the actor, and then they overlay. Basically, what it boils down to is photoshopped files of a younger version or an older version of the actor. You'll see it used
with 3D texture and shapes too.
Yeah. And you'll see that used a lot in the new Marvel movies where they make Nick Fury younger. And actually, that's what I was looking at, because when the new Captain Marvel trailer came out, and you know, everybody was shocked at how young and realistic Nick Fury looked, I started doing some research. And what I found was this guy, his name is Rousselos Araventinos. And this guy's just amazing at what he does. They use this program called Nuke. It's basically Photoshop on crack. It's basically Photoshop on steroids. And they basically create a bunch of layers that they track to the actor's face, body, or what have you. And then these layers just move in 3D space, tracked to the actor's motions. So it's really a frame by frame keying of, you know, digital effects onto live action actors. And so Benjamin Button is no different. They created this 3D space, this 3D model of the face, and they either aged them or de-aged them, depending on the scene. Because if you recall the movie, he starts out old and then he gets younger until he turns into a baby. Spoiler alert.
What?
Yeah, there towards the end. But so just the process that's involved is actually surprisingly painstaking. I thought it would actually, given the tracking technologies and CGI, they still have to do it almost frame by frame. Like Daniel, you know, when you're doing Photoshop and you have all these 15 layers, you know, to create this really magnificent image that you do. Now imagine doing that for every frame for, you know, 90 minutes. I
would get burned out.
Yeah, that's what
like. You're not paying me enough. I'm out of here.
So what they'll do is they'll create that, you know, all those layers, and then they track them. So I've created this really young looking Brad Pitt. You know, they basically de-aged him or aged him depending on the part of the movie, and then frame by frame they tracked all of these different layers, and it's just like I said, it's painstakingly long. I thought it would be faster, but it really is just, it's an art. So this guy, Rousselos Araventinos, he has a Vimeo page where he shows the process and the amount of layers that goes into this thing is just astounding. And so digital de-aging is a marvel, because we don't think about it, because we see it on the screen. It's like, wow, that was amazing. But, just like with Gargantua, one frame could take up in upwards of 100 hours. One scene could take 100 hours for these guys to digitally age or de-age the actor. And it's just an amazing talent, because, it's one thing to just smooth skin like what I do, but it's a totally different thing to like change the contours of their chin, or, deep
facial structure.
Yeah, exactly.
Saggy
anything
cheeks
that's sagging, or anything that's, or
lots
anything
of
that you
sagging.
want to sag, you actually have to create that. Yeah, it's just completely amazing. Amazing technology that I think is completely underrated. When you go and watch those movies where, oh, that's a young version of, Kurt Russell or Samuel L. Jackson, man, the work that goes into that is quite amazing.
Do you know what the earliest use of that technique is? Is that Benjamin Button? Or was there anything before that tried it?
Benjamin Button, again, it was next level
Tron?
stuff. Tron was
Tron?
after. Tron was after.
After, okay.
Yeah, you had Tron Legacy, right? Is that the one you're talking about?
Yeah.
Man, I have to dig a little bit deeper into which one actually did it first. I would think that Benjamin Button, being as complex as it was probably used beforehand.
But you got to give it to them. They're just like pioneering something impossible.
Yeah.
Incredible.
Well, my next one is Transformers. Not a particular movie, but just the overall picture, which is honestly the first one was my favorite. After that, I don't know. I don't know what happened.
Yeah.
But the visual effects, at least on the last one, were so heavy that they actually broke the computer at Industrial Light and Magic.
Whoa.
Wow.
Yeah. So crap of a movie, and they still broke it. But
they did not make that money back.
No, they
not
didn't.
one bit.
But it was through the little bit of research I was able to do, it was quite interesting how they film it. And it's kind of funny, kind of self-explanatory, but like when I saw it, I was like, wow. For instance, they would get up in the chopper and they would go fly around the parts of the city that they're going to film. Well, before here comes the duh moment. They would just film empty scenes of city. And that kind of was like a light bulb to me. I was like, oh, well, duh, because they have to impose all the robots and explosions. And I was
They're not real, Nate.
And, it's been a long day. So anyways, I was like, wow, could you imagine flying around the city and people be like, what are you doing? And be like, well, I'm, filming nothing to superimpose robots and 3D models and all that fun stuff. But it was interesting watching them, like they go up to a building and they would just do like this random camera shake. And then in post, they would, make the robot detail by detail by detail. And then like frame by frame. And then they would add the layers of explosions and building in falling pieces. And then as far as like the actors, it was kind of funny watching some of the city, like I almost said folk, but city people running around. And as they're running around from the robots, they would all just randomly fall, and there was no robot. And but
Michael Bay, explosions.
Yeah, probably. I think, like I said, maybe the first one was my favorite. After that, it got kind of hard to watch. There were so many different angles, multiple cameras, multiple angles, tons and tons of visual effects going on. As far as they have multiple layers, so there's a couple scenes that they filmed. I think they were saying anywhere from like 20 to 30 different times just for this robot to blow something up, and they would have the crowd run, and then they would add like explosions, and then they would add a train where it was flying through the train shots. And but so kind of like what we were just saying about like a frame by frame situation, but totally different. Like not a facial, but just a wide variety of explosions and 3D visual effects.
They did a lot of compositing. It's typical Michael Bay. There's fast moving car chases, there's explosions, and you just can't keep up with the action. You got to watch like 5 times to really grasp a single action scene, which is kind of one of my complaints about those movies. But it is fun eye candy. But there's so much things happening. There's so much compositing, which is compositing would mean adding an explosion here, adding a robot there. A car gets crunched in real life, and we got to add a robot foot or a piece of a robot on top of the car that crunched it. Those things, adding fake stuff into real stuff, which is I do a lot of that in Photoshop. I can't imagine doing it in video. It's a whole new world of 3D tracking,
right?
And adding realism in live moving frames, just a real science and real art. I'm really interested in how they made these robots, because they started with a car shape. And if I remember right, they had to model basically an entire car inside and out. Then they had to decide where these parts were going to go on the robot body. And they made these transformation sequences, which are really cool. I mean, I think we can all admit the transformation sequences are pretty awesome.
Yeah.
It's just it's interesting to watch. Like, could this really happen? Like, how plausible is this? Yeah. And another complaint of the Transformers franchise is I do feel like, like a car transforming into this ginormous robot body. I'm like, where did all this mass come from?
It's 0 point energy. It's like
that's true.
It just comes out of it just comes out of another dimension.
It's like an inflating piece of metal. It just, you got a little buggy. Oh, I just turned into a 25-foot robot now with a full figured body frame and everything. The magical metal of Cybertron. But there's a lot of intense work in those movies, and it is impressive from a visual standpoint. It's just too bad everything else couldn't reflect that quality.
Why do you hate Transformers?
So many reasons. So many. If you guys listen to the podcast for a while, you've heard me rant at least twice about how bad the last movie was. Was it called The Last Night?
Yeah.
The Last Night. Man, it isn't. I think there's still more coming.
The Last Night. I wish The Last Night was the last Transformers movie, but now there's a friggin' Bumblebee movie, which admittedly the trailer looks decent. It almost looks redeeming, but I feel like the only way to really redeem Transformers is just to scrap it all, pun, and just start totally new. But it's not going to happen until people realize how bad they are and they stop watching them. There's a car chase scene, I think in the first Transformers, where they're on a highway and like someone cuts like a chain on the back of a long bed trailer truck, and these pipes, or no, I think it's pieces of a railroad, train axles come bouncing off, and it it's a distraction to trip or mess up another robot in the background, because these big axles are like bouncing on the highway. So that exact scene was done like shot for shot in The Island. It is the weirdest thing. I don't understand why or how this is done, but Michael Bay did both movies, and the exact same chase sequence is in both movies. Just saying.
Wow, I didn't know
check that out. Yeah, I don't know how to find it. Maybe look up Transformers and The Island, like shot for shot, something like that. You'll find it. It's just so weird.
Yeah, I'm gonna look it up.
Were they like out of ideas and they just did it, or were they just doing it as a fun gag?
Disney did that for their cartoons, but
yeah, they reused all the animations. Yeah, that makes sense. There's no excuse these days. Yeah. So speaking of chase scenes and practical effects and cool stuff, my final thing here to add to my favorite visual effects scene in cinema is any of the Fifth Element scenes. The whole movie. I mean, dude, this movie, yeah, there's some campiness to it, a little bit of comic book flavor, but this movie has stood the test of time with its visual effects and props. So good. It's so fun and so beautiful. What a colorful movie. I have always loved Fifth Element. So the one that I really wanted to focus on, although it does kind of expand to the rest of the movie as far as the miniatures, which are not so miniature, we'll find out, is the city chase scenes. Basically, any of the scenes that show this amazing future New York. I have always just been enthralled with that for my childhood up to now, and I just recently figured out how they did it. I always wondered. I knew CGI was not that good when this movie came out. I think it was 97, and I'm like, this cityscape looks real. Like, how did they make this look so real? I thought they shot with a helicopter flying through New York, and they somehow digitally added stuff, but that wasn't even it. So it turns out what they did to make these beautiful and very realistic looking city scenes is they used miniatures that were huge.
Bigatures.
Bigatures.
Yeah,
that's what
Peter
they're called,
Jackson
right?
called them bigatures. Yeah.
I like that. So get this. These buildings that they used for the city scenes are anywhere from 10 to 20 feet tall. You can see, I actually posted a picture on the Visionary Variety Podcast Facebook page of a set picture of the whole team standing in the midst of these city buildings. You will not believe how big these things are. They are like taller than a house. that answers why and how it looks so realistic. Is because
Oh, wow.
the larger a miniature is, the more detail you can cram in, and just
Mhm.
our brains know detail when we see it. And if you've got a smooth, small, undetailed figurine, our brain just kind of gets it. There's just something off. But the bigger these things are, exponentially the reality increases visually with these things. And so they really spent probably a lot of money on these things, but they paid off because those city scenes look awesome. And even the CGI cars look pretty decent, given what they had back in the day to work with. So the crew built these entire cityscapes, these bigatures. Some of the buildings were actually rented, and I didn't know this was a thing, but they rented buildings that were also used in the Godzilla movie.
Oh, wow.
And some other movies that had been out in that time used these bigature cityscapes. And so, yeah, they rented buildings and they used them. It's really funny. And they also reused these same buildings. I'm guessing they would rotate them, reorient them in different combinations. So they use the same buildings in different city scenes, just, like I said, in different arrangements for whatever the scene was. And also they would repaint these cities. So as you remember in the movie, they go downwards, right? As Corbin is escaping the cops, he's going downwards and he's hiding in the smog and going into the darker, dirtier areas of the city. So they use the same buildings, but they repainted them as darker and dirtier and grimier. So they repainted the buildings just to fit the scene, which is really clever. It's a great way to, cut some corners and still get the most out of what you have. And I just thought that was really fun. And they did, of course, digitally extend things, and this is still very impressive. Although it's a not super noticeable in the movie because you can't quite see the detail. But they did use what they had available to them in terms of CGI and matte painting, and they made they extended the whole city. So you're looking down this unending alleyway of buildings, and they only have so many real buildings in the shot. But so beyond that point, once they hit the end of their set in their studio, they would digitally add more buildings, and they were probably just 2D paintings because they're so far away. The perspective was hard to really see. So they added that. They also digitally added the bottoms of the buildings because so in the movie the camera pans downwards and you just see this unending chasm of these super tall buildings in New York City. And so that's not real. There was a ground in the studio, but they erased the ground and they added extensions on the bottoms of these buildings, going down into darkness and a bunch of cars flying through the air down there, kind of like Coruscant in Star Wars. So that was just awesome. Some other interesting things about the city and the miniatures or the bigatures they used was, so in the popular scene where you see Lilu, escaping out of that little hatchway and she's on the edge of the building behind her, you can see people on the deck there, but you can also see these big circular watches or clocks that are hanging. They're just big timepieces. Those are actually like handheld pocket watches that the prop makers, used as public clocks in the set.
Oh, yeah, I see it. Yeah.
Yeah, those are actually pocket watches.
Wow.
Yep.
That's clever.
And,
clever use.
And this wasn't the only place where they used bigatures in this show. The big cruise ship that was on the water planet where where a lot of the action happens, that was also a gigantic bigature. I think it was, I don't know, maybe 8 feet long, maybe a little longer. Beautiful model. I want to know, where are these things now? Like, can I get one of those cabs in my, just in a display case in my house? Because that would be so cool.
You requested the other day on what's the next movie prop on your New Vision page.
Oh yeah.
What's the next new movie prop
that I should make?
Yeah, that you should make. I actually posted the Fifth Element taxi.
That would be an exercise. I might get that a try. That would be fun.
Yeah, that would be.
So yeah, they used a lot of bigatures for the spaceships, the external shots, and I just thought that was really impressive because they knew they could do this with CGI at the time, and CGI was just exploding. Like as this movie was coming out, programs were being made and written, and at the time, studios would make their own software. Like Sony had their own program for compositing, and this studio had their own software, and they were all rivals and they were all competitors. But as the years went on, into the early 2000s, programs began to be made by independent companies and sold as a product, which is really interesting. So I guess they kind of unified all the popular techniques and things that people were doing on their own, and said, "Hey, buy our software, you can do this too." Interesting little behind the scenes there with the software world, kind of finding a need and filling it.
Yeah, there's a lot of movies too. I mean, you mentioned, Godzilla and some of the older movies, but even some more modern films like Lord of the Rings. Lord of the Rings
Oh, yeah,
uses bigatures.
Totally.
But yeah, he was really fond of that practice. I mean, everything was huge.
I follow an account on Instagram, and I'm blanking. I can't remember who or what it is, but it's I don't know if it's ILM or one of the main FX studios, and they post behind the scenes photos, which I just love. And one of them is of Rivendell from Lord of the Rings, and it's a bigature. Yeah, and so they're showing just real people who are working on the set next to this immaculate, just amazingly modeled and bigature set of Rivendell, the Elven city, and it's funny seeing actual people next to these buildings. It's trippy because you're like, yeah, that's from the movie, and then, oh my god, there's a human next to it, and it's small or it's really big. Awesome. All right, well, thank you guys so much for listening to the podcast, and we'll see you next week. Thanks for listening to the Visionary Variety Podcast. If you like the show, be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast app so that you won't miss any of the future episodes. You can also find our previous episodes there and listen whenever you want. We love to hear from our listeners, so if you've got any comments or suggestions for a future episode, you can always reach us at tvvpodcast@gmail.com. Thanks again, and have a great week.
I feel like I'm really hot. Give me a second. My microphone's
You are, Nate.
So hot.
appreciate it.
So hot.
Oh.